Danny Wright stood at the giant glass window looking out at the airplanes moving on the ground below. He was 12 years old with messy brown hair and curious green eyes that never seemed to stop watching everything around him. His mother Caroline sat on a bench nearby checking her phone and occasionally glancing up to make sure her son was still there. They were at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, waiting for their flight to Seattle. Danny had asked to come 3 hours early, even though Caroline thought it was too much time to spend at an airport. But Danny loved watching the planes, and his mother had learned long ago that when her son was interested in something, he gave it his complete attention. Something strange had been happening to Danny for the past 6 months. It started after he got sick with a fever that lasted exactly 3 days. The doctors ran tests but could not figure out what caused it. When the fever finally broke, Danny felt different. He began to notice things that other people did not see. He could hear sounds that seemed to come from machines. He could sense when something electronic was about to break down. His parents thought he was just being imaginative, but Danny knew it was real. The world of machines had opened up to him in ways he could not explain to anyone. As he watched the planes that morning, Danny suddenly felt something wrong. A large Boeing 737 was moving slowly toward the runway. The plane was painted white with blue stripes and had the number 847 on its side. Most people would have seen nothing unusual about it. But Danny could feel something that made his stomach tight with worry. The left engine was making a sound that was not right. It was not a sound that ears could hear exactly. It was more like a vibration that only Danny could sense. The engine was shaking in a pattern that meant something inside was about to fail in a very bad way. Danny pressed his face closer to the glass. His heart started beating faster. He focused all his attention on that engine, trying to understand what his senses were telling him. There was a piece inside the engine called a turbine blade, and one of those blades had a tiny crack in it. The crack was so small that regular inspection equipment would probably miss it. But the blade was spinning thousands of times every minute, and the crack was making it vibrate at a frequency that would soon cause it to break apart completely. If that happened while the plane was high in the sky, the engine would explode. Pieces of metal would fly everywhere, possibly cutting through the fuel lines or damaging the wing. The plane would crash and everyone on board would die. Danny ran to his mother so fast he almost tripped over his own feet. Caroline looked up from her phone with surprise as her son grabbed her arm. His face was pale and his words came tumbling out in a rush. He tried to explain about the engine and the turbine blade and the vibration frequency and the catastrophic failure that was about to happen. Caroline had seen her son excited about planes before, but this was different. Danny looked terrified. His hands were shaking and there were tears forming in his eyes. She did not understand half of what he was saying, but she understood that her son believed something terrible was about to happen. After 12 years of being his mother, Caroline had learned to trust Danny's instincts even when they seemed impossible. She grabbed Danny's hand and they ran together toward the nearest security checkpoint. A uniformed officer named Kevin Martinez stood there checking boarding passes. Caroline rushed up to him, pulling Danny along behind her. She told the officer that her son had information about a plane that was in danger. Officer Martinez looked at the woman and the scared kid, and his first thought was that this was probably nothing. People got nervous at airports all the time. Kids had active imaginations. But there was something about the way the boy was looking at him that made Martinez pause. The kid was not acting like he wanted attention. He looked genuinely frightened. Danny started explaining again. This time he forced himself to speak more slowly and use the technical words he had somehow learned over the past 6 months. He talked about resonance frequencies and metal fatigue and stress fractures. He drew a quick diagram on a piece of paper showing where the damaged blade was located inside the engine. Officer Martinez had worked at the airport for 8 years, and he had never heard a 12-year-old kid talk like this. The boy was using engineering terms that most adults would not know. Martinez made a decision. He picked up his radio and called his supervisor, Lieutenant Helen Brooks. Lieutenant Brooks arrived within 3 minutes. She was a tall woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Martinez explained the situation, and Brooks looked at Danny with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. She asked Danny to explain everything again from the beginning. Danny took a deep breath and told her about the vibration he could sense in the left engine of Flight 847. He explained that turbine blade number 7 had a hairline fracture and was vibrating at its natural frequency. In approximately 15 to 20 minutes, when the plane reached cruising altitude and the Engine was under maximum stress that blade would fail. Catastrophically, Brooks had 20 years of experience in airport security, and she had dealt with false alarms and paranoid passengers more times than she could count. But something about this situation felt different. The kid was not hysterical. He was calm and precise. He was providing specific technical details that would be easy to verify. And if there was even a small chance he was right, then 200 lives were at risk. Brooks made the call. She contacted the control tower and requested an immediate halt of Flight 847. The tower was not happy about it. The pilot, Captain Paul Henderson, was furious when he got the order to return to the gate. 217 passengers were already seated and ready for departure to Los Angeles. But protocol was protocol, and when security made the call, everyone had to listen. The maintenance crew arrived, led by Chief Engineer Gregory Palmer. Palmer was a stocky man with oil stains on his uniform and 30 years of experience working on aircraft engines. He listened to the report about the 12-year-old kid who claimed to sense a problem with the turbine blade, and he thought it was the most ridiculous thing he had heard all week. But he was a professional, so he ordered his team to do a complete inspection of the left engine. They brought out their diagnostic equipment and started checking every system. It took them 40 minutes to find it. Turbine blade number 7 had a hairline crack exactly where Danny said it would be. The crack was so small it had been missed during the last routine inspection. Palmer's hand started shaking as he realized what would have happened if the plane had taken off. The investigation team that arrived later that day confirmed that the damaged blade would have failed at approximately 38,000 feet. The failure would have caused a cascade of damage throughout the engine. Pieces of the destroyed turbine would have punctured the engine housing. The force of the explosion would likely have severed hydraulic lines and possibly damaged the wing structure. Computer simulations showed that the aircraft would have become uncontrollable within 90 seconds. The crash would have killed everyone on board. 217 people, including 43 children, would have died over rural Iowa, far from any help. But they did not die because a 12-year-old boy could hear what no one else could hear, and because he had the courage to speak up even though he knew most people would think he was crazy. Danny Wright had saved 217 lives without even getting on the plane. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Within 2 hours, every major television station in America was reporting the story of the 12-year-old boy who had prevented a catastrophic plane crash. Reporters called it a miracle. Scientists called it impossible. But the facts were undeniable. Danny Wright had detected a mechanical failure that sophisticated equipment had missed, and his warning had saved 217 lives. By evening, the Wright family's home in suburban Chicago was surrounded by news vans and reporters shouting questions. Helicopters circled overhead with cameras pointed at their modest 2-story house. The phone rang so many times that Richard Wright finally unplugged it from the wall. Caroline tried her best to protect Danny from the chaos. She closed all the curtains and told him to stay away from the windows. Richard had taken emergency leave from his construction job to help deal with the situation. They both knew their lives had changed forever, but they had no idea how much. Danny sat at the kitchen table trying to process everything that had happened. He had saved all those people and he felt proud of that, but he also felt scared because now everyone would want to know how he had done it. How could he explain something that he himself did not fully understand? The ability to sense machines and feel their problems was not something that came with an instruction manual. The next morning at exactly 8 o'clock, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up in front of the Wright house. 2 people in dark suits stepped out and walked to the front door with calm, professional movements. Richard looked through the peephole and saw the badges they held up. Secret Service. His heart started pounding as he opened the door. The woman introduced herself as Agent Laura Bennett and her partner was Agent Marcus Cole. They were polite but serious. They had a message that needed to be delivered in person. Agent Bennett reached into her jacket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope with an official seal embossed in gold. The seal of the President of the United States. Richard's hands shook as he took the envelope. Caroline and Danny came to the door and the 3 of them stood together as Richard carefully opened it. Inside was a letter written on official White House stationery. President Elizabeth Morgan requested the presence of Danny Wright and his family at the White House. Not next week. Not in a few days. That very afternoon, a military helicopter would arrive at 12 noon to transport them to Washington. The letter explained that this was a matter of national importance, and that all arrangements would be made for their comfort and safety. It was signed personally by the president. The Wright family sat around their kitchen table in stunned silence. Caroline read the letter 3 times, trying to convince herself it was real. Richard kept checking the seal and the signature, looking for any sign that this was some kind of elaborate joke. Danny sat quietly watching his parents. Of all of them, he seemed the least surprised. Something about this felt right to him. His ability had revealed itself for a reason, and now that reason was becoming clear. He was meant to do something important. He could feel it the same way he could feel the electrical current running through the walls of their house or the wireless signals passing through the air around them. At noon exactly, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air above their neighborhood. Neighbors came out of their houses to watch as a Marine Corps helicopter descended into the park 3 blocks away. The agents escorted the Wright family through the crowd of reporters and curious onlookers. Caroline held Danny's hand tightly. Richard carried a small bag they had hastily packed with a change of clothes and basic necessities. None of them had ever been in a helicopter before. The noise was overwhelming, and the vibration of the aircraft hummed through Danny's bones. But he was not afraid. The machine felt strong and reliable to his senses. Every system was functioning perfectly. During the flight, Agent Bennett sat across from the family and explained what was happening. The Federal Aviation Administration had sent their full report to the Department of Transportation. The Department of Defense had taken an interest because of the national security implications. The National Security Council had been briefed, and President Morgan herself had requested this meeting because she wanted to understand what Danny could do and how his abilities might be used to help others. Agent Bennett was careful with her words, but the message was clear. Danny's gift was something that could change the world, and the most powerful people in the country wanted to know everything about it. As the helicopter approached Washington, Danny pressed his face against the window. The city spread out below them like a circuit board, with streets and buildings forming patterns that his enhanced senses could almost read. The electromagnetic fields from millions of electronic devices created a symphony that only he could hear. Cell towers broadcast their signals. Power lines carried electricity through the urban landscape. Computer networks pulsed with data. It was beautiful and overwhelming at the same time. Danny realized that his ability was not just about sensing machines. It was about understanding the invisible web of technology that connected the modern world. The helicopter touched down on the south lawn of the White House. Danny had seen pictures of this place in school, but being here in person was completely different. The building radiated power, not just political power, but electromagnetic power. Every security system, every computer, every camera and sensor created a field that Danny could feel pressing against his consciousness. It was like standing next to a massive waterfall of information. He had to concentrate to filter out the noise and focus on the present moment. Agent Cole helped them out of the helicopter and led them across the perfect grass toward the entrance. President Elizabeth Morgan stood waiting for them at the entrance. She was flanked by 2 other people who, Danny would later learn, were Chief of Staff Peter Collins and Secretary of Defense General Raymond Novak. The president stepped forward and extended her hand to Danny. Her handshake was firm and warm. She looked into his eyes and smiled in a way that seemed genuine, not practiced for cameras. She told him that what he had done was remarkable and that his country was grateful. Then she said something that surprised everyone. She said that she believed Danny had been given his ability for a reason, and that she wanted to help him understand what that reason might be. They were led into the West Wing and down a corridor to a room that Danny recognized from television, the Situation Room. Inside, a group of serious-looking people sat around a large table, scientists in casual clothes, military officers in uniform, government officials in suits. All of them turned to look at Danny as he entered. President Morgan introduced them one by one. Dr. Amanda Foster from MIT, who studied how the brain works. Dr. Leonard Hayes from DARPA, the military research agency. Colonel Stephen Blackwood from the Air Force. Each of them had read the reports about Danny, and each of them had questions. But the president raised her hand and asked them to wait. First, she wanted to know how Danny was feeling. Was he scared? Was he comfortable? Did he need anything? Danny appreciated that. The President of the United States was treating him like a person, not like a science experiment. Danny told her he was fine. He was curious more than scared. He wanted to understand his abilities as much as they did. He had questions too. Were there others like him? What caused this to happen? Could it be reversed, or would he have this gift forever? President Morgan nodded thoughtfully. She said those were exactly the right questions to ask, and she promised that together, they would find the answers. But first they needed to establish exactly what Danny could do. They needed to document his abilities and understand their limits. Would Danny be willing to undergo some tests? Nothing painful, nothing dangerous, just demonstrations that would help the scientist understand his gift. Danny looked at his parents. Caroline looked worried, but she nodded. Richard squeezed his son's shoulder. Danny turned back to the president and said he would do whatever was needed. The scientists set up their first test in a corner of the situation room. They brought in a metal box about the size of a shoebox sealed with screws so nobody could see. Inside, Dr. Foster explained that the box contained mechanical and electronic components. Danny's task was to describe what was inside without opening it. No touching, no shaking, just sensing. Danny stepped up to the table where the box sat. He could feel his parents watching him nervously. President Morgan stood with her arms crossed, looking intensely curious. The scientists held tablets and notebooks ready to record whatever happened. Danny closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He extended his awareness toward the box the way he had learned to do over the past 6 months. At first there was just the general hum of electromagnetic activity that filled every room. But as he focused, he began to sense the specific signatures coming from inside the sealed container. There was a motor. He could feel the residual magnetic field in its coils. The motor shaft was slightly bent, creating an asymmetry in its field. There were circuit boards. He counted 3 of them. 2 had components that were no longer functioning. Failed capacitors that had lost their charge. And there was a battery, small lithium-ion type at about 63% charge. He opened his eyes and described everything he had sensed. Dr. Foster's face went pale. The other scientists looked at each other in disbelief. They opened the box. Inside was exactly what Danny had described. A servo motor with a bent shaft, 3 circuit boards with 2 failed capacitors. A small battery that when tested showed 63% charge. Colonel Blackwood let out a low whistle. Dr. Hayes from DARPA began typing furiously on his tablet. President Morgan smiled slightly as if she had expected this outcome. She asked the scientists if they were ready to proceed to the next test. They all nodded, though several of them still looked stunned by what they had just witnessed. The second test was more complex and potentially more dangerous. They brought in a laptop computer that had been isolated from all networks. Dr. Hayes explained that this computer had been deliberately infected with a sophisticated virus. The virus was designed by the National Security Agency's best programmers and was virtually undetectable by conventional security software. It was hidden deep in the operating system, disguised as legitimate code. The test was to see if Danny could locate the virus and describe what it did. This was important because if Danny could detect cyber threats, his abilities might be crucial for national security. Danny sat down in front of the laptop. He placed his hands on either side of the keyboard without actually touching it. The computer was turned on and running, but just sitting at the desktop screen. Danny could feel the electricity flowing through the circuits. He could sense the rapid firing of the processor as it executed millions of instructions per second. All computers felt busy and chaotic to his senses, but this one had something else. There was a pattern in the data flow that felt wrong. Like a melody with one note that did not belong. He followed that discordant pattern through the system, tracing it back to its source. After about 3 minutes, Danny began to describe what he was sensing. The virus was located in the system's core processes. It was disguised as a network management routine. Its primary function was to monitor all data passing through the computer and send copies to an external destination when the computer connected to the internet. It also had a secondary function. If it detected certain keywords related to classified information, it would activate a more aggressive routine that could corrupt files or shut down the system. Danny pointed to a specific area on the screen and told them that was where the main code was hiding. He described the exact file path and the method used to mask the virus from detection software. Dr. Hayes verified everything Danny had said. The virus was exactly where Danny indicated, and it functioned exactly as he described. Hayes looked at Danny with an expression that mixed awe with concern. He quietly told President Morgan that what Danny had just done would normally require weeks of analysis by a team of expert programmers. The ability to simply sense malicious code by its electromagnetic signature was not supposed to be possible. Yet here was a 12-year-old boy doing it in minutes. The implications for cybersecurity were staggering. Colonel Blackwood proposed the third and final test. This one would take place off-site at Andrews Air Force Base. They had an F-35 fighter jet that had been grounded for 3 weeks due to an unknown mechanical issue. The aircraft was one of America's most advanced weapon systems, but it had developed an intermittent problem that the best Air Force engineers could not diagnose. Sometimes the aircraft's systems would shut down unexpectedly during startup. Sometimes everything worked fine. The problem seemed random, and all their diagnostic equipment showed that every component was functioning within normal parameters. If Danny could find the problem, it would prove his abilities worked on the most sophisticated machines humanity had built. They flew to Andrews Base in Marine One, the presidential helicopter. The flight took 20 minutes, and Danny spent the whole time sensing the city passing below them. The density of electronic signals in an urban area was incredible. Every building was full of devices broadcasting and receiving. Every car had computers controlling its systems. Every person carried a phone that connected them to global networks. Danny wondered how he had lived his whole life without sensing any of this. Had it always been there waiting for him to wake up to it? Or had the world somehow changed when his abilities emerged? At Andrews, they were escorted to a secure hangar. Inside sat the F-35 in question. The aircraft looked sleek and dangerous, even sitting motionless on the hangar floor. Colonel Blackwood introduced Danny to the maintenance crew who had been working on the aircraft. Their chief mechanic looked skeptical when told that a kid was going to solve their problem. But one sharp look from the colonel kept him from voicing his doubts. Danny walked slowly around the aircraft. He could feel the enormous complexity of the machine. Thousands of components all integrated into systems within systems. The computers that controlled the aircraft were more powerful than most supercomputers from a decade ago. And somewhere in all that complexity was one small thing that was wrong. Danny stopped near the forward section of the fuselage. He placed his hand on the smooth surface of the aircraft. The metal was cool under his palm. He closed his eyes and let his awareness sink into the machine, the power systems, the flight computers, the weapon systems, the sensors. Everything was connected through a complex web of electrical pathways. And there, he found it, a single microchip in the integrated power management system. The chip itself tested fine in isolation, which was why the diagnostic equipment had not flagged it. But the chip had a manufacturing defect that caused it to produce tiny voltage fluctuations. Each fluctuation was well within acceptable tolerances, but when they cascaded through other systems, they created interference patterns that occasionally caused the whole system to shut down. It was like a pebble creating ripples in a pond. One tiny imperfection affecting everything downstream. Danny opened his eyes and described exactly where the problem was. He gave them the specific circuit board location and even the position of the defective chip on that board. The maintenance crew looked doubtful, but they followed his directions. They removed the panel he indicated and extracted the circuit board. They replaced the chip Danny had identified with a new one from their parts inventory. Then they reassembled everything and ran a full diagnostic test. The F-35 powered up smoothly. Every system initialized perfectly. They ran the test 5 more times. No problems. The aircraft that had been grounded for 3 weeks was fully operational again. The chief mechanic walked up to Danny and extended his hand. He did not say anything, but his handshake conveyed his respect. Colonel Blackwood stood very still, watching Danny with an expression that was hard to read. Later on the flight back to the White House, the colonel would quietly tell President Morgan that what they had witnessed changed everything. The ability to diagnose complex mechanical and electronic systems instantly was revolutionary. In military terms, it was a weapon. In civilian terms, it was a miracle. Either way, they had to understand it, control it, and protect it. The world could not know the full extent of what Danny Wright could do. Not yet. Back in the Situation Room, President Morgan asked the question that everyone was thinking. Was Danny the only person in the world with abilities like this, or were there others? Danny had been wondering the same thing since his gift first appeared. He had not wanted to seem strange or make claims he could not prove. But now, surrounded by people who had seen what he could do, he felt safe sharing what he had sensed. He told them that during the tests, especially when he had been concentrating deeply, He had felt something unexpected. There were other people out there. Not many, maybe 1 in 10 million, but they existed scattered around the country and probably around the world. People with different gifts who could do things that normal humans could not. Dr. Foster leaned forward eagerly. She asked Danny to explain how he knew this. Danny struggled to put it into words. He said it was like hearing distant echoes. When he used his ability to sense machines and technology, he sometimes caught glimpses of other minds doing similar things. One felt like someone who could manipulate gravity. Another seemed to process information faster than any computer. There was someone who could sense living things the way Danny sensed machines. He could not see these people or locate them precisely. He just knew they were out there. Their gifts left traces in the fabric of reality that someone like Danny could perceive. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. General Novak, the Secretary of Defense, was the first to speak. He pointed out the strategic implications. If there were others with superhuman abilities, other nations would be looking for them too. This could spark a new kind of arms race. Not nuclear weapons, but enhanced humans who could tip the balance of power. The general's voice was calm but firm as he recommended creating a classified program to find these individuals before anyone else did. They could be valuable assets for national security. They needed to be identified, recruited, and trained. President Morgan held up her hand, stopping the general mid-sentence. She understood his concerns about security, but she was not comfortable with the idea of treating people as weapons. These were human beings, potentially children like Danny. They had rights and freedoms that could not be ignored just because they had unusual abilities. The president's voice was steady as she laid out her position. They would find these people, yes. They would study and understand these abilities, yes, but they would not create a military program. They would not force anyone into service. They would offer help, support, and training. And most importantly, they would give these enhanced individuals a choice. Dr. Foster supported the president's approach. From a scientific standpoint, coercion would be counterproductive. They needed to understand what caused these abilities and whether they could be safely developed. That required willing participants who felt respected and valued. Dr. Hayes from DARPA nodded agreement, though he suggested they still maintain security protocols. The existence of enhanced humans could cause widespread panic if revealed prematurely. Colonel Blackwood proposed a compromise. Create a civilian research institute with government funding and oversight. The enhanced individuals would be free to come and go, but the facility would be secure and protected. This would give them a safe place to develop their abilities while keeping sensitive information classified. President Morgan approved the plan. She announced that they would establish the Human Advancement Initiative. It would be dedicated to finding, studying, and training enhanced humans. Dr. Foster would lead the scientific research, Colonel Blackwood would handle security, and Danny would be their first member. More than that, he would help find the others. His ability to sense enhanced humans made him uniquely qualified for this role. The president looked at Caroline and Richard Wright. She promised them that Danny would be protected. He would continue his education. He would have a normal life as much as that was possible, but he would also be part of something important. Something that could change the future of humanity. Caroline had been quiet through most of the meeting, listening to these powerful people discuss her son's future. Now she spoke up. She said she understood that Danny had a gift and that the world needed what he could do, but he was still her child. She would not allow him to be used or put in danger. Richard added that they wanted to be involved in every decision. Danny would not face this alone. President Morgan agreed without hesitation. The Wright family would be consulted on everything. Danny's well-being would be the top priority. This was not a military operation. It was a collaborative effort to help extraordinary people reach their potential. Danny listened to the adults discuss his life and felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him was scared. This was bigger than anything he had imagined. But another part of him felt excited. His ability had always seemed like a burden, something that made him different and isolated. Now it had purpose. He could help people. He could find others like himself. They could work together to understand what they were and what they could become. Danny looked at his mother and father and saw the worry in their eyes. He reached out and took their hands. He told them he wanted to do this, not because the president asked or because the government needed him, but because it felt right. He had been given this gift for a reason, and he was ready to discover what that reason was. President Morgan made it official. The Human Advancement Initiative would begin operations within 30 days. They would secure a facility and assemble a team. Funding would be allocated through classified channels. A global search would begin for other enhanced individuals, though it would be conducted quietly to avoid public panic. In the meantime, Danny would stay with his family and return to his normal routine as much as possible. But he would also begin preliminary training to better understand and control his abilities. Dr. Foster would set up equipment at a secure location near Chicago, so Danny would not have to travel far from home. Everything would be done gradually with the Wright family's full involvement. As the meeting concluded, Danny felt that strange sensation again. That presence he had sensed before when he was concentrating deeply. It was stronger now, more focused. Something vast and ancient was watching. Not hostile exactly, but intensely interested, like a scientist observing an experiment. The feeling made Danny's skin prickle. He tried to focus on it to understand what it was, but the sensation faded before he could grasp it. He considered mentioning it to the others, but decided to wait. He needed to understand it better himself first. Whatever that presence was, it had something to do with these abilities. Danny was sure of that. Somewhere out there was an answer to why this was happening, and he had a feeling they would discover it sooner rather than later. They flew back to Chicago that evening. Danny sat by the helicopter window watching the sun set over the landscape below. Patches of forest and farmland gave way to suburbs and then the sprawling city. From up here, everything looked so organized and peaceful, but Danny could feel the chaos underneath. Millions of machines all running simultaneously. Billions of electrical signals creating a web that covered the continent. And scattered through that web like stars in the night sky were those faint echoes. Other enhanced humans going about their lives, probably not even knowing what they were. Soon Danny would help find them. Together they would unravel the mystery of their abilities. And perhaps they would discover why evolution or fate or something else entirely had decided that humanity needed to change right now at this moment in history. When they landed in Chicago, reporters were still camped outside their house, but police had set up barriers to keep them at a distance. The Wright family made their way inside, and Caroline immediately locked the door. Richard closed all the curtains while Danny went up to his room. He sat on his bed surrounded by familiar things. Posters of airplanes on the walls. Models he had built sitting on shelves. His laptop and books and all the ordinary possessions of a 12-year-old boy. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. In 24 hours, his entire world had transformed. Yesterday he was a kid with a strange ability that he mostly kept secret. Today he was part of a government initiative that would shape the future. Danny lay back on his bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow his new life would really begin. Tonight he just wanted to be a normal kid a little while longer. 3 months passed quickly. The Human Advancement Initiative facility opened in rural Virginia, far from any major city. The compound was built with incredible speed using both conventional construction and some experimental techniques. It had research laboratories that looked like something from a science fiction movie, training facilities where enhanced humans could safely test their abilities, comfortable living quarters for those who chose to stay full-time, and security measures that would make a military base jealous. Everything was surrounded by forest and protected by fences that appeared ordinary, but were actually integrated with sensors and defensive systems. The official story was that this was a new research center for studying human potential. That was technically true, even if it left out the most interesting details. Danny had helped locate 17 other enhanced humans so far. Each discovery followed a similar pattern. Danny would sense one of those faint echoes he had described. Dr. Foster's team would use that information to narrow down a geographic location. Then trained investigators would make discreet contact. Some of the enhanced people knew they were different and were relieved to find others like themselves. Some had no idea their abilities were unusual. They thought everyone could do what they did. Each person had a unique gift. Sophie Chen was 14 and could manipulate gravitational fields around small objects, making them lighter or heavier. Marcus Brown was 22 with enhanced cognitive processing that let him solve complex math problems instantly in his head. Nina Patel was 19 and could sense biological systems detecting diseases and sometimes accelerating healing. The youngest was 8-year-old Lucas Grant, who could see across the entire electromagnetic spectrum, from radio waves to gamma rays. His parents had thought he was making up stories about the colors he saw until the initiative found them. The oldest was 63-year-old Patricia Hughes, whose ability to predict weather patterns with uncanny accuracy had been dismissed as luck by everyone who knew her. They all had one thing in common. Each had experienced a neurological event within the past 2 years, a fever that lasted exactly 3 days. Doctors had been unable to explain it. Blood tests showed nothing unusual. But after the fever broke, each person found themselves changed, able to perceive or do things that should not be possible. Dr. Foster's research team worked around the clock trying to understand the mechanism. They discovered a unique pattern of neurotransmitter activity in the enhanced individuals' brain. Scans showed unusual neural pathways that seemed to have formed overnight during the fever period, but they could not identify what triggered the transformation. They tested for viruses, bacteria, environmental toxins, genetic markers. Everything came back negative or inconclusive. It was as if something had reached into these people's brains and rewired them. But what and why remained mysteries. Dr. Foster privately admitted to Danny that conventional science might not have the tools to explain this. They might be dealing with something beyond current human understanding. Late one night, Danny was working in the main laboratory. He was helping Dr. Foster's team calibrate new detection equipment that they hoped would make finding enhanced humans easier. The laboratory was quiet except for the hum of machines and the occasional beep from monitoring equipment. Danny had his hands on a sensor array trying to show the technicians what he sensed when he focused on distant enhanced humans. That was when it happened. The presence he had felt before suddenly became overwhelming. It was not just watching anymore. It was reaching out, specifically to him. Danny's consciousness exploded outward. One moment he was standing in a laboratory in Virginia. The next moment his awareness was expanding beyond the facility, beyond Earth itself. He could perceive the solar system as a vast machine. Planets moving in their orbits. The sun burning with nuclear fire. Asteroid fields and comets tracing their paths through space. And flowing through it all were signals. Patterns of energy and information that connected everything. The solar system was not just rocks and gas floating in vacuum. It was alive with communication. And someone, or something ancient and powerful, was broadcasting. The experience was too much for Danny's mind to handle. He collapsed. The sensor array sparked and died as feedback from his enhanced senses overloaded its circuits. Alarms started blaring, and within seconds medical staff rushed into the laboratory. They found Danny unconscious on the floor. His vital signs were stable, but he was not waking up. They moved him carefully to the medical bay and ran every test they could think of. Dr. Foster stayed by his bedside, calling Caroline and Richard to let them know what had happened. President Morgan arrived within the hour, having taken a helicopter from Washington the moment she heard. Nobody knew what to do except wait. Danny woke up 6 hours later. He opened his eyes and saw worried faces surrounding his bed. His parents. Dr. Foster, President Morgan, Colonel Blackwood, several medical staff with their equipment. Everyone started asking questions at once, but Danny held up his hand for silence. His mind was still reeling from what he had experienced. He needed a moment to organize his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse but steady. He told them that he had made contact, not with another enhanced human, but with something extraterrestrial. An intelligence from beyond Earth that had been watching humanity for a very long time. And that intelligence had sent him a message. The room fell silent. President Morgan sat down on the edge of Danny's bed. She asked him to explain everything slowly and carefully. Danny closed his eyes, trying to recall the flood of information that had poured into his consciousness. He said the signal had been broadcasting for decades, maybe centuries. It was designed to be received by minds that had reached a certain level of awareness. That was why only the enhanced humans could sense it. Normal human brains did not have the neural pathways necessary to detect it. The signal was a message and an invitation. Humanity was being contacted by something ancient and powerful, something that wanted to prepare humans for what was coming. Dr. Foster asked the obvious question: what was coming? Danny opened his eyes and looked at each person in turn. His gaze was older somehow, as if the experience had aged him. He said that humanity was about to discover it was not alone in the universe. Other civilizations existed out there among the stars. Some were friendly, some were not. Earth had remained hidden and protected for thousands of years. But human technology had advanced to the point where they could no longer stay hidden. Within 50 years, maybe less, other civilizations would notice Earth and make contact. The question was whether humanity would be ready for that contact, or whether it would destroy them. General Novak, who had arrived during Danny's unconsciousness, asked who was sending the signal. Danny explained that the intelligence called themselves the Architects. They were not exactly a species in the biological sense. They were more like a collective consciousness that had existed for millions of years. They had seeded hundreds of worlds with life throughout the galaxy. Earth was one of their projects. Humans had been allowed to evolve naturally, but the Architects had included a safeguard, a genetic key that could be activated if humanity reached a critical point in development. The enhanced humans were that safeguard. The fever was the activation sequence. The abilities were humanity's next evolutionary step, designed to emerge exactly when they were needed most. President Morgan looked pale, but her voice remained calm. She asked if Danny could receive this signal again. Could they document it and study it? Danny said he thought so, but he would need help. The signal contained enormous amounts of information, too much for one mind to process safely. He suggested that they bring together all the enhanced humans and attempt to receive the signal as a group. Their combined abilities might let them decode the full message without anyone getting hurt. Dr. Foster agreed it was worth trying. Colonel Blackwood immediately began making security arrangements. If they were going to attempt communication with an alien intelligence, they needed to control every aspect of the environment. No leaks, no witnesses, no recordings except what they authorized. Within 48 hours, all 17 enhanced humans gathered at the facility. Danny explained to them what had happened and what they needed to do. Some were scared, some were excited. All of them understood that this was bigger than anything they had imagined. They were not just people with unusual abilities. They were humanity's first contact with something beyond Earth. They were ambassadors whether they wanted to be or not. Dr. Foster set up a special chamber lined with sensors and recording equipment. The enhanced humans would form a circle and link hands. Together they would open their minds to the signal and try to understand what the Architects were trying to tell humanity. It was dangerous, it might not work, but they had to try. The future of the human race might depend on what they learned from that ancient alien message waiting in the stars. The 17 enhanced humans stood in a circle in the specially prepared chamber. Danny took his position at what they had designated as the North Point. To his right was Sophie, who could manipulate gravity. To his left was Marcus with his superhuman calculation abilities. The others filled in the circle, each bringing their unique gift to this collective attempt. Dr. Foster and her team monitored from an observation room separated by thick glass. President Morgan stood with them, watching intently. Every sensor they had was pointed at the circle, recording whatever data they could capture. Nobody knew exactly what was about to happen. They only knew it would be important. Danny counted down from 3. On 0, they all joined hands and opened their minds to the signal. At first, nothing happened. Then Danny felt the presence return, that vast alien consciousness reaching out across the void. He directed the others toward it, showing them how to sense what he sensed. One by one they connected. Sophie felt it through gravitational waves. Marcus perceived it as pure mathematics. Nina sensed it through the biological frequencies. Lucas saw it as colors beyond human spectrum. Each person contributed their unique perception to the collective awareness. And as they all linked together, something remarkable occurred. Their individual consciousness began to merge into something greater than the sum of its parts. The Architects made contact. Information flooded into the shared consciousness, not in words or images, but in pure understanding. The enhanced humans learned everything simultaneously. The Architects were indeed ancient. They had existed for more than 3 million years. They were not biological creatures anymore, if they ever had been. They were patterns of consciousness maintained in the fabric of space itself. Living information that could never die as long as the universe existed. They had decided long ago that intelligence was precious and rare. So they took it upon themselves to nurture it wherever they found the potential. Earth was one of hundreds of worlds they watched and guided. Humans had evolved naturally for millions of years. The architects did not interfere with that process, but they did leave something in human DNA. A genetic key that would activate when humanity reached a specific threshold of development. That threshold was the splitting of the atom and the launching of satellites. These achievements proved that humans had the intelligence and capability to become a spacefaring species. But they also made Earth visible to other civilizations. Radio and television broadcasts leaked into space. Nuclear detonations created detectable energy signatures. Satellites reflected sunlight in patterns that could not be natural. After remaining hidden for all of human history, Earth had suddenly announced its presence to the galaxy. That was when the architects activated the genetic key. The enhancement signal had been broadcasting for 2 years, triggering the 3-day fever in select individuals. The selection was not random. The architects chose people based on psychological factors: compassion, curiosity, the desire to help others. The enhanced abilities would give humanity the tools they needed to survive first contact. But more importantly, the enhanced humans would serve as examples. They would show what humanity could become if they chose unity over division and cooperation over competition. The architects shared technical information, blueprints for technologies that would transform human civilization, clean energy systems that drew power from quantum fluctuations in empty space, medical techniques that could cure almost any disease by manipulating biological systems at the cellular level, faster than light communication using quantum entanglement, methods for extending human lifespan dramatically, advanced materials stronger than diamond but lighter than aluminum. The list went on and on. Technologies that would take humanity centuries to develop on their own were being handed over freely. But there was a condition. The architects had observed thousands of civilizations at this critical stage. Most failed. They destroyed themselves through war over these new technologies, or through environmental collapse caused by rapid industrialization, or through social breakdown as traditional structures could not adapt to rapid change. Only about 1 civilization in 10 survived to become truly spacefaring. The architects could provide the tools, but they could not force wisdom. Humanity would have to choose how to use what they were given. If humans chose war and domination, the architects would withdraw their support and Earth would be left to face the galaxy alone. If humans chose peace and cooperation, they would be welcomed into a larger community of civilizations. The message included a warning. First contact would occur within 50 years. A species called the Corvin had detected Earth's broadcasts and were sending an exploratory mission. The Corvin were not hostile, but they were mercantile. They saw newly discovered civilizations as resources to be exploited through trade agreements that heavily favored the Corvin. If humanity met them as a divided planet with no unified leadership, the Corvin would play different nations against each other. They would extract Earth's resources and knowledge while giving little in return. But if humanity presented a united front and had already advanced their technology, the Corvin would offer fair terms. Strength and unity were the only things the galaxy respected. The connection lasted 7 minutes. When it ended, the 17 enhanced humans opened their eyes simultaneously. They were still holding hands in the circle. Dr. Foster's equipment had recorded everything, translating the alien communication into electromagnetic patterns that could be analyzed. But the enhanced humans did not need the recordings. They had experienced the message directly and they all remembered it perfectly. They looked at each other with expressions of awe and fear and determination. In 7 minutes they had learned that everything humanity believed about the universe was incomplete. They were not alone. They had never been alone, and their future depended on choices they would make in the next few years. President Morgan entered the chamber. She looked at their faces and knew immediately that they had succeeded. She asked Danny to explain what they had learned. Danny and the others took turns describing the message. The architects. The coming first contact. The technologies. The choice humanity faced. President Morgan listened without interrupting. When they finished, she stood silent for a long moment. Then she made a decision that would define her presidency and perhaps the future of human civilization. She would tell the world everything. No more secrets. No more classified programs. Humanity deserved to know the truth about their place in the universe and what was coming. General Novak and Colonel Blackwood tried to argue against it. They said public panic could be devastating. The social and economic disruption could cause more damage than any alien threat, but President Morgan was firm. Keeping this secret would be impossible anyway. They were going to build technologies based on alien designs. They were going to prepare for first contact. People would notice. Better to control the message and release the truth on their own terms. Besides, humanity could not unite if they were divided by secrets and lies. If the architects were right that unity was essential, then transparency had to come first. She scheduled a worldwide address for 2 weeks later. That would give them time to brief world leaders and prepare evidence. The United Nations would hold emergency sessions. Scientists from every nation would be shown the data. Prototypes of the alien technologies would be demonstrated to prove this was not a hoax. It would be the most significant announcement in human history, the revelation that would change everything. President Morgan looked at Danny and the other enhanced humans and thanked them. They had given humanity a chance. Now it was up to all of humanity to decide what to do with it. Danny felt the weight of what was coming. In 2 weeks, the world would learn about the architects, about the enhanced humans, about the coming first contact. There would be chaos. There would be people who did not believe. There would be religious leaders questioning what this meant for their faith. Scientists demanding proof. Politicians trying to exploit the situation for power. But underneath all that, Danny believed most people would respond with hope. Hope that humanity could be better. Hope that they could reach the stars. Hope that the universe held wonders beyond imagination. He looked around at his fellow enhanced humans. These were his people now. Together they would guide humanity through what came next. And somehow Danny knew that this was just the beginning. The real adventure was still ahead, waiting in the vast darkness between the stars. The 2 weeks before the announcement were the most intense of President Morgan's career. She met personally with the leaders of every major nation. Some believed her immediately, especially after seeing the evidence and the prototype technologies. Others were skeptical until their own scientists confirmed the data. A few accused her of creating an elaborate scheme for global domination, but eventually, even the doubters had to accept the impossible truth. Earth was about to join a larger universe, whether anyone was ready or not. The United Nations Security Council held emergency sessions that went on for days. They debated how to present this information. What to say? How to prevent panic? How to maintain order while fundamentally changing humanity's understanding of reality? Meanwhile, Dr. Foster's team worked frantically to build working prototypes. They started with the clean energy device. It was smaller than a refrigerator but produced enough power to run an entire house indefinitely. The device contained no fuel and produced no waste. It drew energy from quantum fluctuations in the fabric of space itself, something that theoretical physicists had said was possible, but no one had figured out how to do until the architects showed them. When they turned it on for the first time, the readings were impossible. Free energy, limitless power. If this technology was shared with the world, it would eliminate fossil fuel dependence overnight. No more oil, no more coal, no more nuclear plants with their dangerous waste. Just clean, unlimited power available to everyone. The night before the announcement, Danny stood with Sophie on the roof of the initiative facility. They had become close friends over the past months. Both were young people thrust into circumstances beyond anything they could have imagined. Sophie used her gravity manipulation to make a small rock float between her hands. She asked Danny if he was scared. Danny admitted he was terrified. Tomorrow the whole world would know about them. About the architects. About everything. People would react in unpredictable ways. Some would see the enhanced humans as saviors. Others would see them as threats. There would be religious movements declaring this the end times. Governments trying to control access to the alien technologies. Companies competing to profit from them. And through it all, 17 young people would be at the center trying to help humanity navigate this transition. Sophie let the rock drop and looked up at the stars. She said she hoped people would see this as an opportunity rather than a threat. Humanity had been alone in the universe, or so they thought, for their entire existence. Now they were learning they were part of something bigger. That should be exciting, not scary. Danny agreed, but he understood human nature. People were afraid of change, especially change this dramatic. Still, he had to hope that the better parts of human nature would prevail. The curiosity, the desire for knowledge, the dream of reaching the stars that humans had held since they first looked up at the night sky. If those impulses won out, humanity would be okay. If fear and tribalism won, then the next 50 years would be very difficult. The announcement took place simultaneously across every time zone. President Morgan spoke from the Oval Office, but her image and words were broadcast on every major network in every language. Translation teams had worked around the clock to make sure everyone could understand. The 17 enhanced humans stood with President Morgan, visible proof that humanity was changing. Danny stood front and center, trying not to be nervous as cameras pointed at him from every angle. His parents were in the room, too. Caroline looked proud and terrified. Richard kept a protective hand on her shoulder. They had given permission for Danny to be part of this. Now they watched as their son became the face of humanity's transformation. President Morgan spoke clearly and calmly. She explained about the signal from space, the architects who had been watching humanity for thousands of years, the enhanced humans who represented humanity's next evolutionary step, the coming first contact with alien civilizations, the technologies that would transform life on Earth, and most importantly, the choice humanity faced. They could work together and join the galactic community as equals, or they could remain divided and be exploited by more advanced civilizations. The decision belonged to everyone. This was not about one nation or one government. This was about the entire human species choosing their future together. The president announced the formation of the Global Unity Initiative, a coalition of nations dedicated to preparing humanity for its place among the stars. The alien technologies would be shared freely with all nations. No one country would control them. Enhanced humans from every part of the world would be found and trained. They would work together regardless of nationality. Resources would be pooled. Knowledge would be distributed. Humanity would face the future as one species, not as competing factions. It was an idealistic vision. Some said impossibly idealistic, but President Morgan argued that impossible was exactly what they needed. Humanity had always achieved its greatest things when working toward impossible dreams. The reaction was exactly as chaotic as everyone predicted. Stock markets crashed within minutes as investors panicked. Then they soared as people realized what unlimited clean energy meant for the economy. Religious leaders went on television to debate what this meant. Some said it confirmed that God created life throughout the universe. Others warned of demons masquerading as aliens. Scientists gave interviews trying to explain the physics to confused audiences. Governments rushed to establish their own programs to study and implement the new technologies. Social media exploded with theories and arguments. Some people refused to believe any of it, calling it the greatest hoax ever perpetrated. Others immediately accepted everything and started preparing for the arrival of aliens. But underneath the chaos, something remarkable was happening. People around the world were talking to each other. Really talking. Across borders and languages and cultures, they were discussing what it meant to be human in a universe full of other intelligent life. Old conflicts suddenly seemed petty and pointless. What did political disagreements matter when aliens would arrive in 50 years? What did national borders mean when humanity needed to present a united front? What did economic competition matter when technologies could provide abundance for everyone? For the first time in recorded history, humans had a common goal that transcended all their usual divisions. Survive, thrive, prove that humanity deserved its place among the stars. Within 6 months, the first quantum fusion reactor went online, providing clean power to 5 million homes. Within a year, medical treatments based on the architect designs began curing diseases that had killed millions. Cancer became treatable, heart disease preventable. Even aging itself could be slowed significantly. Communication satellites using quantum entanglement connected the world in ways that made the old internet look primitive. Information traveled instantly across any distance. Language barriers fell as translation became automatic and perfect. The technology was spreading faster than anyone expected. Not because governments were forcing it, but because people demanded it. Why should anyone suffer from disease when cures existed? Why should anyone lack power when unlimited energy was available? More enhanced humans emerged as the activation signal continued to spread. Hundreds, then thousands came forward, each with unique abilities. The initiative facilities expanded to accommodate them all. Some could manipulate matter at the molecular level, restructuring materials with thought alone. Others could perceive higher spatial dimensions, seeing shortcuts through space itself. Some could interface directly with quantum computers, thinking at speeds that made normal computation look frozen. The diversity of human potential was staggering. Every enhanced person added something new to humanity's collective abilities. And they all worked together, guided by the principle that their gifts were meant to serve, not to dominate. Danny, who was now 13, had become the public face of this transformation. He gave interviews explaining what the enhanced humans were and what they were trying to do. He spoke at conferences about the coming first contact. He helped ordinary people understand that these changes were not something to fear. The enhanced humans were not replacing normal humanity. They were showing what all humans could potentially become. The architects had explained that the genetic key existed in every human. Theoretically, anyone could develop enhanced abilities if the key was properly activated. Research was underway to understand the process. Maybe someday everyone would have access to these gifts. For now, the enhanced humans worked to prepare civilization for a future that was rapidly approaching. 5 years after Danny had prevented the plane crash, Earth had transformed beyond recognition. The old problems that had plagued humanity, disease, poverty, energy scarcity, were being solved. Not perfectly, not everywhere, but progress was undeniable. People lived longer, healthier lives. Resources were abundant. Education had evolved to include techniques for developing latent human potential. The world was not perfect. There were still conflicts and disagreements. But the overall trend was positive. Humanity was growing up, getting ready for their debut on the galactic stage. And watching it all from the stars, the architects observed with satisfaction. Humanity had chosen unity over division. Danny Wright stood at the viewport of the spacecraft and watched Earth grow smaller below him. He was 17 now, no longer the scared 12-year-old who had sensed a failing airplane engine. 5 years of training and experience had shaped him into someone who understood his abilities and their purpose. The spacecraft around him was called Unity's Hope, and it represented everything humanity had accomplished in those 5 years. Built using both human engineering and technology provided by the architects, it was capable of faster-than-light travel, something that human scientists had thought impossible just a few years ago. Now it was real, and Danny was part of the crew that would make humanity's first interstellar journey. The mission had begun 18 months earlier when humanity received their first intentional message from another civilization. The Talon Confederation, a peaceful alliance of species located 40 light-years from Earth, had been monitoring human progress since the architects activated the enhancement signal. They had watched as humanity transformed itself, as nations learned to cooperate, as new technologies spread across the planet, as enhanced humans worked alongside normal humans to prepare for first contact. The Talons were impressed. Most species they encountered were either too primitive to communicate with or too aggressive to approach safely. But humanity had shown the rare combination of intelligence, compassion, and unity that made them good candidates for joining the galactic community. The Talons sent an invitation. They wanted to meet humanity face to face. They offered to share knowledge and establish formal relations. A human delegation would be welcome on their homeworld. The journey would take 3 years, using the faster-than-light drive that the architects had taught humans to build. It was a long time, but worth it. This would be humanity's introduction to the galaxy, their chance to prove they deserved a place among the stars. Danny had volunteered immediately. He was one of the first enhanced humans, and his abilities made him uniquely valuable. He could sense the ship's systems, ensuring everything functioned properly. He could communicate with the architects if needed. And perhaps most importantly, he understood what this journey meant for humanity's future. The crew consisted of 20 people. 10 enhanced humans, including Danny, Sophie, Marcus, and Nina, who had been with the initiative from the beginning. 10 normal humans, including scientists, diplomats, and engineers. President Morgan had insisted on that balance. Enhanced humans were special, but this mission represented all of humanity. The ship's captain was Commander Lisa Brennan, a former astronaut with 20 years of experience. She had been skeptical of the enhanced humans at first, but working with them over the years had changed her mind. They were not superior beings or replacements for normal humanity. They were people with gifts who used those gifts to help others. That was what mattered. Danny's parents had come to the launch site in Nevada to see him off. Caroline cried even though she tried to hide it. Her little boy was leaving Earth for 3 years. She might be in her 60s by the time he returned. Richard hugged his son and told him to be careful. But both of them were proud. Danny had saved lives at an airport when he was 12. Now he was representing his entire species to alien civilizations. They had raised someone extraordinary, and they knew he would make humanity proud. As the launch countdown proceeded, Danny stood with the other crew members looking up at the ship that would carry them to the stars. It looked like something from a science fiction movie. sleek and silver with lines that suggested both power and grace. Humanity's first true starship. The launch was broadcast worldwide. Billions of people watched as Unity's hope lifted off from the Nevada desert. The engines made no sound in the vacuum of space, but they left trails of distorted light as they bent space-time around the vessel. Within minutes, Earth became a blue marble suspended in darkness. Within hours, the moon was behind them. Within days, they reached the edge of the solar system. Commander Brennan gave the order to engage the faster-than-light drive. The ship's engines built up power. Reality itself seemed to shimmer around them. Then, with a sensation like falling and flying simultaneously, they jumped. Space twisted. The stars streaked into lines of light. And Unity's hope began its 3-year journey across 40 light-years of space. Life aboard the ship settled into a routine. The crew trained and studied, learning everything they could about the Talons and galactic civilization. They exercised in the ship's gravity centrifuge to maintain bone and muscle density. They ate meals together in the common area. They played games and watched movies and tried to stay sane during the long journey. Danny spent much of his time interfacing with the ship's systems. His enhanced senses could detect problems long before any diagnostic equipment. He could feel when a power coupling needed adjustment, or when a waste recycling system was becoming less efficient. The crew joked that Danny was the ship's immune system, constantly monitoring and fixing little problems before they became big ones. Sophie practiced her gravity manipulation in special training rooms. She had gotten much stronger over the years. Now she could affect objects weighing hundreds of pounds. The military applications were obvious, but Sophie refused to think of her gift as a weapon. She was going to meet aliens as a representative of humanity's best qualities. Marcus spent his time solving complex mathematical problems that would help humanity understand the advanced physics needed for true space travel. Nina studied the limited information they had about Talon biology, preparing to provide medical assistance if needed. Every enhanced human used their gifts to prepare for what awaited at the end of their journey. On the 1000th day of their journey, Danny stood at the viewport again. This time he was not looking back at Earth. He was looking forward toward their destination. The Talon star system was still too far away to see individual planets, but Danny could sense it somehow. Life and intelligence and civilization waiting to meet them. He thought about everything that had led to this moment. A 12-year-old boy hearing something wrong in an airplane engine. His decision to speak up even though he knew people would think he was crazy. The president's invitation. The tests. The discovery of the architects. The message that changed everything. Every step had led here to humanity's first meeting with alien intelligence. Sophie joined him at the viewport. She asked what he was thinking about. Danny said he was remembering that day at O'Hare Airport. How scared he had been. How impossible everything seemed. But he had trusted his gift and people had believed him. 217 lives saved. That had set everything else in motion. Sophie smiled and pointed out that Danny had actually saved more than 217 lives. By preventing that crash and proving his abilities, he had set humanity on a path that might save the entire species. Without Danny, there would be no Enhanced Humans program, no message from the architects, no global unity. Humanity would still be divided and unprepared for first contact. One brave decision by a 12-year-old boy had changed the course of history. Danny felt humbled by that perspective. He had never thought of it that way. He had just done what felt right. Spoken up when he saw danger, helped people when he could, used his gifts in service of others. That was all. But Sophie was right. Small choices had enormous consequences. The decision to be brave instead of silent, to help instead of hiding, to trust in something larger than himself. Those choices rippled outward, affecting millions of lives. Maybe that was what being human meant. Not the enhanced abilities or the alien technologies, but the choice to do good even when it was hard or scary. That was the quality that would carry humanity through whatever challenges lay ahead. Commander Brennan's voice came over the intercom. They were approaching the Talon system. Time to prepare for arrival? Danny and Sophie made their way to the bridge where the rest of the crew was gathering. On the view screen ahead, a yellow star grew brighter. Planets orbited around it, and on one of those planets, an ancient alien civilization waited to meet the humans who had traveled 40 light years to say hello. Danny felt excitement and nervousness in equal measure. This was it, the moment when humanity stepped onto the galactic stage, when they proved they deserved to be there. When they showed the universe that humans were more than primitive apes who had learned to build rockets, they were a species capable of transformation, of unity, of reaching beyond their limitations to grasp something greater. The Talon homeworld appeared on the view screen. Blue and green like Earth, but with continents shaped differently, cities visible even from orbit, structures that humans had never imagined, technology integrated with nature in ways that seemed almost magical. Commander Brennan opened a communication channel. She spoke the words that had been prepared by linguists and diplomats. "Greetings from humanity. We come in peace seeking friendship and knowledge." There was a brief delay as the message was transmitted. Then a response came back. Alien words translated by computers into English. "Welcome, representatives of Earth. Welcome to the beginning of your journey among the stars." And Danny smiled because he knew humanity's greatest adventure was just beginning.